coast of Iran right now, a ship is moving through the dark. It is not a warship, it is a tanker, and it is carrying enough oil to power a mid-sized country for a week. This is the world running. Every light, every factory, every car, every heated home in winter, every flight, all of it connected to one place, a single strip of water 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. From a satellite, it looks like a crack in the desert, easy to miss, easy to forget. But 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil consumed on Earth today passes through this crack. 1 out of every 5 molecules of liquefied natural gas. The factories of China run on it. The cars of Europe run on it. The food supply of 3 billion people depends on it. 21 miles. This is the Strait of Hormuz. It is the most important choke point on Earth. More important than the Panama Canal, more important than the Suez Canal, more important than any road, any pipeline, any trade route in the modern world. And right now, as you watch this, it is under attack. Ships have been struck. Crews have been killed. The world's largest energy corridor is effectively closed. Oil prices are spiking by the hour, and governments from Washington to Tokyo are holding emergency sessions trying to figure out what comes next. How did we get here? How did the entire modern world end up dependent on 21 miles of water, controlled by one of America's oldest enemies, with no backup plan and no way out? That is what this documentary is about. And the answer, when you hear it, is going to make you angry. But before we get to the anger, there is a question that nobody in Washington, London, Beijing, or Tehran has been able to answer for 50 years. A question so simple it sounds almost stupid. If this waterway is so critical, so fragile, so dangerous, why has the world never built a way around it? Why, after every crisis, every war, every near catastrophe, does the world simply patch things up, exhale, and walk straight back into the same trap? That question is going to follow us through every chapter of this documentary. And the answer, when we finally reach it, is more uncomfortable than anyone wants to admit. Geography is destiny. In Hormuz, geography is a loaded gun, and right now, someone's finger is on the trigger. Chapter 1. The Geographic Trap. Before we talk about the wars, before we talk about the oil, before we talk about Iran and America and everything in between, we need to talk about the water itself, because the Strait of Hormuz is not just a political problem, it is a geographic one. And geography, unlike politics, cannot be negotiated. Here is what you are looking at. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the open ocean beyond. It is roughly 100 miles long, but length is not the issue, width is. At its narrowest point, so the part that matters, that the strait is just 21 miles across. Those 21 miles contain 2 shipping lanes, one going in, one going out. Each lane is 2 miles wide. 2 miles. Now picture the ships that use those lanes. A VLCC, a very large crude carrier, is 330 meters long. That is longer than the Eiffel Tower laid on its side. It is carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil. And it has to navigate a 2-mile lane with other ships of the same size coming the other way. Every 10 minutes, around the clock, every single day of the year, 138 ships per day pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Think about that rhythm for a moment. One ship, every 10 minutes, day and night, without stopping. That is the heartbeat of the global economy. And every single beat happens in this 21-mile gap. Now here is the part that makes the geography terrifying. Behind this narrow gate sit the world's energy giants: Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Iran itself. These countries hold some of the largest oil and gas reserves on the planet, and almost every drop of it, if it is going anywhere, has to pass through this gate. Saudi Arabia moves more oil through the strait than any other country. Iraq is second, the UAE third, Iran fourth, Kuwait fifth. Together, just those 5 countries account for more than 90% of everything that flows through Hormuz. And they cannot go around it. There is no other way out. Qatar is the world's second largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. Every single molecule of that gas leaves through the Strait of Hormuz. Not most of it, all of it. Bahrain? No alternative. Kuwait? No alternative. Iraq? Largely no alternative. These are not small countries. These are some of the wealthiest, most strategically critical energy producers on Earth. And they are all, every one of them, prisoners of this geography. It is the world's most important corridor, and it has no backup, no plan B, no detour. If this water stops moving, the world economy does not slow down. It seizes. But here is what most people do not know about the Strait of Hormuz. This fight is not new. People have been killing each other over this water for 3,000 years. The only thing that has changed is the price of what flows through it. The name itself, Hormuz, comes from the ancient Persian name for Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of Zoroastrianism, the god of light and truth. This water has carried a divine name since before the Roman Empire existed. A Roman merchant sailing east from Egypt in the 1st century AD wrote a guide to the trade routes of the ancient world. He described this passage, this same gap of water, in words that could have been written yesterday. All the ships that come from the far side, he wrote, must pass through this narrow gate. There is no other way. He did not give it a name. He did not need to. Every merchant who sailed east knew where the gate was. Romans, Persians, Arab dhow captains, Indian spice traders. For 2,000 years, they all recognized the same thing. Whoever held this narrow gap held the tax booth of the known world. The first superpower to truly understand this was Portugal. In 1507, a Portuguese admiral named Afonso de Albuquerque sailed into the strait with a small fleet, captured the tiny island of Hormuz, sitting in the middle of the water, and built a fortress on it. With that single move, Portugal seized the toll booth of global trade. Portugal finally lost the strait in 1622. And the way they lost it tells you everything about how this geography has always worked. They were not beaten by a superior navy in open water. They were beaten by a coalition. The Persian Shah Abbas I allied with the English East India Company, which provided the naval muscle in exchange for lucrative trading contracts. Even in 1622, the Strait of Hormuz was too valuable for one power to hold alone, and too valuable for any power to abandon. 400 years later, nothing has changed. The ships are different, the weapons are different, the flags are different, but the question is the same question it has always been. Who controls the gate? And right now, for the first time in modern history, that question does not have a clean answer. One ship, every 10 minutes, day and night. If that rhythm stops for 30 days, just 30 days, oil markets enter crisis, prices double, and the global economy tips into recession. 30 days. That is the entire margin between stability and catastrophe. And we are already past 30 days. For most of history, the strait was contested, but ultimately open, because the prize moving through it, pearls, spices, silk, frankincense, was valuable, but not civilizationally critical. Then, in the early 20th century, something was found beneath the desert floor that changed the arithmetic of power forever. And the men who found it, and the decisions they made with it, set in motion a chain of events that leads directly to the burning tankers and the closed shipping lanes of today. The story of why Hormuz is a crisis today starts not in a war room, not in a missile bunker. It starts in a boardroom in London in 1908 with an oil company, and a deal so lopsided it created enemies that are still shooting at us today. Chapter 2. Black Gold and the Betrayal. It is 1908. A British drilling crew is working a remote patch of Iranian desert. They have been here for 7 years. They are broke. They are exhausted. The company financing them has already decided to pull the plug. Then the drill hits something. At 4 a.m. on May 26th, a black fountain of oil erupts 60 feet into the desert sky, roaring, unstoppable. The first major oil discovery in the Middle East, and it does not belong to Iran. The rights to extract that oil belong to a British company, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, a deal so one-sided that most Iranians would not grasp what they had signed away for decades. Here is what those terms meant in practice. Iran's oil, extracted from Iranian soil by Iranian workers, generated enormous wealth, and most of that wealth left the country. Britain received the lion's share of profits. Iran received royalties, modest ones, disputed ones, royalties the company refused to allow independent audits on, because auditors might discover how much Iran was actually owed. The Abadan refinery became the largest oil refinery on Earth. British staff lived in comfortable European-style accommodation. Iranian workers lived in separate, inferior facilities. The oil that flowed from Iranian ground made Britain's Royal Navy the most powerful maritime force in the world. Iran got the labour, Britain got the fuel. For decades this arrangement held, not because Iranians accepted it, but because they had no power to change it, until one man decided they did. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh, and he was about to commit, in the eyes of London and Washington, an unforgivable act. He was going to give Iran its oil back. In 1951, the Iranian parliament voted to nationalise the oil industry. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was told to leave. Iran would take control of its own resources. The profits would fund Iranian schools, Iranian hospitals, Iranian infrastructure. The reaction in the streets was joyful. Mossadegh became a national hero overnight. The reaction in London was fury. Britain organised an international boycott. Tankers were instructed to avoid Iranian ports. International oil companies refused to buy Iranian crude. Financial sanctions tightened until Iran's government revenue collapsed. The largest refinery on Earth sat idle. Workers were laid off by the thousands. The democratic government Mossadegh led began to suffocate, not because it had failed, but because it was being strangled from the outside. Britain wanted to invade. They seriously considered it. In the end, they chose something quieter. They went to Washington. Britain told the Americans that Mossadegh was a communist threat, that if he stayed in power, Iran might fall into the Soviet orbit, that the Cold War could be lost in the Persian Gulf. This was not true. Mossadegh was an Iranian nationalist, not a communist. He was not aligned with Moscow. He simply wanted Iranian oil to benefit Iranians. But the argument worked. President Eisenhower authorized a covert operation. The CIA called it Operation Ajax. The man sent to run it was Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt. He arrived in Tehran with suitcases full of cash and a plan. The plan was simple and brutal. Bribe newspaper editors to print lies about Mossadegh. Pay street gangs to start riots, hire men to pose as communists and attack religious leaders, creating the impression that Mossadegh's government was enabling chaos. Manufacture a crisis. Then offer the Shah, Iran's monarch, who had already fled the country, a way back to power. The first attempt failed. CIA headquarters cabled its station. Operation has been tried and failed. Do not proceed. The spy on the ground ignored the cable. 4 days later, on August 19, 1953, the coup succeeded. Around 300 people died in the streets of Tehran. Mossadegh was arrested, tried, sentenced to death, then reduced on the Shah's orders to 3 years in a military prison, followed by house arrest for the rest of his life. He died in 1967. He never saw freedom again. The CIA had overthrown Iran's only democratically elected government. The cost of the operation, approximately $1 million. The oil revenues it protected, billions annually. The CIA overthrew Iran's democracy to protect a British oil company, $1 million. That is what it cost. And the resentment that Operation created is still paying dividends today. You can draw a straight line from Kermit Roosevelt's suitcase full of cash in 1953 to every Iranian missile fired at a tanker in 2026. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company later changed its name. You know it today as BP. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution swept him from power. Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile in Paris. The American embassy was seized. 52 Americans were held hostage for 444 days. Iran, the country whose democracy America had destroyed to protect an oil company, became America's most committed enemy in the Middle East. It has been that enemy ever since. Look at what the revolution left Iran holding: the northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles of the world's most critical waterway, with Iran's mountains pressing right up to the water's edge. That is not just territory, that is leverage. The concept has a name: the Hormuz card. Iran does not need to close the strait to weaponize it. Even a threat to close it adds an immediate premium to every barrel of oil sold anywhere on Earth. Insurance rates spike, shipping companies reroute, oil markets price in the risk, producers profit, consumers pay. Iran has played this card dozens of times since 1979 without ever fully following through, because the threat held in reserve is worth more than the act. It is the most powerful economic weapon in the world, and it costs Iran nothing to hold. But in the 1980s, the world discovered what happened when the Hormuz card was not just threatened, but partially played. When the Persian Gulf became a war zone, when tankers started burning, and when America found out the hard way that a $30,000 mine could almost bring the entire global energy system to its knees. Chapter 3: The Ghosts of the Tanker War, September 1980. Saddam Hussein's Iraq invades Iran. The border explodes. 8 years of grinding warfare follow, one of the bloodiest conflicts since the Second World War. Hundreds of thousands die in trench warfare that looks, in its horror, like something from 1914. Mustard gas, human wave attacks, bodies in the mud. For the first 4 years, the war stays on land. Then, in 1984, both sides run out of ways to win, and they do what desperate powers always do: they take the fight somewhere else. Iraq starts attacking Iran's oil terminal at Karg Island, trying to cut off the revenue Iran needs to keep fighting. Iran retaliates the only way it can, by hitting neutral tankers supplying Iraq's allies: Kuwaiti ships, Saudi ships, ships that have nothing to do with the war except that their cargo keeps Iraq funded. Over the next 4 years, more than 500 ships are attacked in the Persian Gulf. The world's oil supply has been pulled into a war it had nothing to do with. Insurance premiums for Gulf shipping go through the roof. Shipping companies start asking a question that no one has had to ask since the Second World War: is it safe to sail in there at all? The first tanker to sink is the Liberian Neptunia. February 1985. An Iraqi Exocet missile hits its engine room. The ship goes down. The message to the world is clear: no ship in the Persian Gulf is safe. Not from Iraq, not from Iran, not from anyone. Kuwait watches all of this with rising panic. Its tankers are being hit. Its oil revenue is bleeding. It is a small country with no military capable of protecting its own ships in open water. So Kuwait does something bold. It reaches out to both superpowers at once. The Reagan administration moves fast. The US agrees to reflag 11 Kuwaiti tankers as American vessels. They will fly the Stars and Stripes. They will sail under US Navy escort. Operation Earnest Will begins in 1987. The most powerful navy in the world is now escorting oil tankers through a war zone. Through the same strait it would be escorting tankers through nearly 40 years later. Some things don't change. For a while it works. The convoys move, the oil flows, the Soviets stay out. And then, on an April afternoon in 1988, a frigate called the USS Samuel B. Roberts finds something in the water. At 4:45 in the afternoon, lookouts spot mines floating in the shipping lane. Commander Paul Rinn orders battle stations. He begins carefully backing the ship out of the minefield. 25 minutes of slow, precise maneuvering. Then a mine detonates directly beneath the ship. The explosion rips a 15-foot hole in the hull. It breaks the keel, it floods the engine room and knocks both gas turbine engines off their mounts. The force of the blast raises the ship's stern 10 to 12 feet out of the water. 10 sailors are injured, 4 are badly burned. The keel is broken, the engine room is flooded, and the hull has a 15-foot hole in it. The ship should sink. Every law of physics says it should sink. It doesn't. Commander Rinn has drilled his crew relentlessly. A boatswain's mate, a sonar technician, a ship fitter, a cook, and a radioman rig emergency power in 22 minutes. The crew fights fires and flooding for 7 straight hours. They save the ship. Navy divers later recover fragments of the mine from the seafloor. Serial numbers on the casing match mines seized from an Iranian mine layer months earlier. The evidence is conclusive. Washington authorizes a response. A single Iranian mine, costing an estimated $30,000, nearly sank a $200 million warship, triggered a full US Navy battle response, and almost started a regional war. That is the math of asymmetric warfare, a cheap weapon, a catastrophic consequence. It is the exact same math being calculated in Tehran right now. 4 days after the mine strike, the US launches Operation Praying Mantis, 3 naval strike groups, air support from the Enterprise. Targets: Iranian oil platforms being used as military command posts, Iranian naval vessels operating in the Gulf. It is the largest American naval surface battle since the Second World War. The Sasson oil platform is warned, broadcast in English, Arabic and Farsi. Some Iranians flee. Those who stay open fire on the approaching American ships. The platform is destroyed. The Siri platform is destroyed. Iranian speedboats scatter across the Gulf, attacking civilian vessels, a Panamanian oil rig, a British tanker, an American flag supply ship. 6 intruders from the Enterprise find them. The boats do not make it back. The Iranian frigate Sahand opens fire on an American aircraft. The US Navy responds with 3 Harpoon missiles, laser-guided bombs, and a 1,000-pound conventional strike. The Sahand burns for hours. It sinks before nightfall. Its captain, as the ship goes down, radios a final message: "Though injured, we fought them to the last breath and the last bullet." By sundown, Iran's navy has been effectively destroyed in a single afternoon. In the aftermath, Iran's military draws a conclusion: not that they should stop fighting, but that they should never fight that way again. Never conventional surface battles against the US Navy. Never ship against ship in open water. Instead, mines, speedboats, shore-based missiles. The permanent, credible threat of disruption, and something else. Something Iran would spend the next 4 decades building. In 1991, after the Gulf War, it took more than 40 Allied ships and 4 months to clear Iraqi naval mines from the Persian Gulf. And that was in a cooperative environment, with Iraqi minefield charts in hand, and no one shooting at the mine-clearing vessels. Iran is estimated to hold a stockpile of 5,000 to 6,000 mines. No charts, no cooperation, shore-based missiles covering every clearance vessel. Military analysts estimate a genuine mine-clearing operation in a contested strait would take months. Months during which the global economy runs on emergency reserves. Those reserves cover 34 days. The tanker war ends in 1988. A ceasefire follows, the lanes reopen, and the oil flows again. The world exhales, slowly, gratefully, and begins the quiet work of convincing itself that the worst is behind it. It is not even close. What Iran takes from the 1980s is not a defeat, it is a lesson. A detailed, hard-won education in exactly what the United States Navy can and cannot do. Where it is strong, where it is vulnerable. What it costs to fight it, what it costs not to. Over the next 3 decades, while the world is focused elsewhere, and on September 11th, on Iraq, on Afghanistan, on the rise of China, Iran goes to school on that lesson and builds a trap designed for exactly the geography that surrounds them. Mountains that hide missile batteries, islands that command the shipping lanes, fast boats that swarm faster than radar can track. A doctrine built not to defeat the US Navy in open battle, but to make the cost of using it too high to sustain. By the time the world pays attention again, the trap is already set. Iran did not stumble into this position. It was built, deliberately, patiently, over 40 years, while the world was looking the other way. Chapter 4, the Iranian chessboard. Look at the map. Really look at it. Iran's northern coastline along the Strait of Hormuz is not a gentle shoreline. It is not beaches and harbours and open ground. It is a wall of mountains pressing directly into the water. Limestone ridges, jagged cliff faces, terrain so rugged that for centuries it was barely inhabited. After 1988, Iran stopped seeing that terrain as a limitation. They started seeing it as a weapons platform. Behind those ridgelines, buried in reinforced concrete bunkers cut into the rock, Iran has spent 4 decades installing anti-ship missile batteries. You cannot see them from the water, you cannot see them from the air without knowing exactly where to look. They are part of the mountain, and the mountain runs the entire length of the northern coastline. To clear those missile batteries, you would not be bombing a military base. You would be bombing a mountain range. Then there are the islands. Iran controls a chain of islands inside and around the strait. Cheshm, the largest island in the Persian Gulf, sitting just off the Iranian mainland. Abu Musa, Greater Tunb. Lesser Tunb, Larak. Small pieces of rock and scrub, unremarkable from the air. Iranian military researchers have a name for them. Stationary unsinkable aircraft carriers. Abu Musa is a fortified early warning and surveillance centre. Cheshm is the primary military hub, its interior riddled with underground bunkers and mobile missile launchers that can be repositioned between strikes. Larak commands the eastern approaches to the shipping lanes. Every tanker that passes through the strait passes within range of at least one of these islands. Every single one. There is no route through the strait that does not run past Iranian territory. The geography makes it impossible. The shipping lanes are 2 miles wide. The islands are right there. The mountains are right there. The world's most important waterway runs directly through Iran's front yard. Now add the boats. After the destruction of its conventional navy in 1988, Iran made a decision. It would never again try to match the United States ship for ship. It would never again put a frigate in open water against an American strike group. Instead, Iran built what military analysts now call an anti-navy. Not a force designed to win conventional naval battles, a force designed to make the cost of fighting in the strait too high for any opponent to sustain. The IRGC Navy's fast attack boats travel at 50 to 70 knots, faster than most warship countermeasures can reliably track. Each boat carries machine guns, rockets, anti-ship missiles, torpedoes. Some carry mines. Jane's Defense, the Bible of military intelligence, says Iran has no equal anywhere on earth when it comes to swarming tactics. The doctrine is not complicated. Do not send 40 boats from one direction. Send dispersed waves, 20 boats from the left, 20 from the right, 20 more from ahead, simultaneously from multiple directions, closing fast. The goal is not to sink the warship. The goal is to overload it. A US Navy Aegis destroyer is one of the most advanced warships ever built. Its radar and missile systems can track and engage multiple targets simultaneously. It is extraordinarily capable, but it has a magazine, a finite number of interceptor missiles. An SM-2, the standard missile used to shoot down incoming threats, costs $400,000 each one. A fast attack boat costs $500,000. An Iranian drone costs $50,000. Do the math. Iran does not need to sink an aircraft carrier. It does not need to win a battle. It just needs to make every insurance company in London refuse to cover the route. It just needs to make every shipping company's board of directors vote against sending tankers through. It just needs to make the cost of entry too high for commerce to continue. Now, that is not a military strategy. That is something more effective. It is economic strangulation. And it works without firing a single shot. Through the 1990s, American aircraft carriers used to transit the strait routinely. They would steam through the narrow channel, flags flying, projecting power into the Gulf. They don't do that anymore. As Iran's shore-based missile system grew and battery by battery, bunker by bunker through the 1990s and 2000s, the US Navy quietly made a calculation. The strait is too narrow, the missiles too numerous. An aircraft carrier inside the strait is a $200 billion target in a shooting gallery. Today, American carriers operate from the Gulf of Oman, outside the strait, beyond the range of most Iranian shore-based systems. Their aircraft can still reach the Gulf, but only with continuous, expensive aerial refueling support. The world's most powerful navy has been pushed back from the world's most important waterway, not by battle, by the credible threat of one. And then there are the mines. Iran learned the mine lesson in 1988, learned it from the Roberts strike, from the 1991 Gulf War clearance operation, from 4 decades of study. Iran's current mine stockpile is estimated at 5,000 to 6,000. The types vary. Contact mines, influence mines that detonate in response to a ship's magnetic signature or acoustic profile, bottom mines that sit on the seabed and are nearly impossible to detect from the surface. The US Navy, despite discovering this vulnerability in 1988, still has no credible dedicated fleet of mine-clearing vessels. The same gap, 40 years later, still open. Mine-clearing ships are slow, and while they work, they sit inside the range of every Iranian missile battery on that coastline above them. Military planners estimate the operation would take months. The world's oil reserves cover 34 days. But Iran has not stopped at mines and missiles and boats. The newest layer of the trap operates in a domain you cannot see at all: cyber attacks on navigation systems, GPS spoofing, feeding false location data to ships' instruments so they believe they are somewhere they are not. Interference with AIS tracking, the system commercial vessels use to broadcast their position. Autonomous underwater drones that can approach a tanker hull with no surface signature, no radar return, no warning. A disruption of the Strait of Hormuz no longer requires a single conventional shot to be fired. A coordinated cyber attack on navigation infrastructure, combined with the mere rumor of mines, can halt commercial traffic through economic paralysis alone. No missiles needed, no boats needed, just doubt. Because the moment insurers decide the strait is too risky to cover, the shipping companies have no choice. They stop sending ships, the oil stops moving, and no Iranian mine has to detonate, no Iranian missile has to launch. The trap closes itself. For 4 decades, this entire architecture, the missiles, the islands, the boats, the mines, the cyber capability, the doctrine built layer by patient layer since 1988, has been held in reserve, not used, displayed. Iran waves the card without playing it, because playing it carries a cost that Tehran has never been willing to absorb. Iran's own oil exports move through the same strait. Iran's own economy depends on the same water it is threatening to close. The weapon is pointed at the world, but the trigger is inside the room, and everyone in that room knows it. So the balance holds. Iran threatens, the world pays attention. Insurance premiums rise, oil prices spike, and Iran quietly extracts a geopolitical premium from every barrel of oil sold anywhere on Earth without doing anything at all. The threat held in reserve has always been worth more than the act itself. That balance has held since 1988, through the tanker war aftermath, through the revolution, through every crisis and every ceasefire and every near miss in between, until February 2026, when the act became necessary and the drawer finally opened. Chapter 5. The moment of maximum danger.
After years of preparation and months of speculation, Israel attacked its #1 enemy, Iran.
June 13th, 2025. Israel launches the largest airstrike in its history against targets across Iran, military installations, air defense systems, and for the first time, nuclear facilities, sites that Iran has spent decades building and defending and denying. It is the first direct Israeli attack on Iranian soil. The Middle East holds its breath. Iran retaliates within hours. Drones and ballistic missiles aimed at Israel. Israel's air defenses intercept most of them. Some get through. Oil markets don't wait for the damage assessment. Brent crude jumps 12% before the London markets even open. Not because the strait has closed, not because a single tanker has been touched, but because the market knows what is sitting on that northern coastline. What is buried in those mountains? What is waiting on those islands? The market has read the last chapter. 9 days later, on June 22nd, the United States enters the conflict. B-2 stealth bombers carrying bunker-buster munitions strike underground Iranian nuclear facilities, sites buried so deep that no conventional weapon had ever been able to reach them. The operation is called Midnight Hammer. The strikes are precise, the damage is severe. A nuclear program built painstakingly across 30 years is set back in a matter of hours. In Tehran, the Iranian parliament convenes an emergency session and votes to authorize the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. The resolution passes. It is signed by the right people and filed in the right place. And then, through Omani back channels, the same quiet corridor that has kept these two countries from the final edge for decades, American and Iranian intermediaries find enough common ground to stop the bleeding. A ceasefire is announced. Both sides step back. The world exhales. The drawer stays closed, for now. The authorization to close the Strait of Hormuz was signed in June 2025. It required one vote in one parliament and one signature. It was not used yet. But from that moment forward, every tanker captain in the Persian Gulf, every insurance underwriter in London, every energy minister in Tokyo and Berlin and Delhi knew that the paper existed, that it was real, that someone somewhere had the authority to act on it. The threat had crossed a line it had never crossed before. It was no longer hypothetical, it was policy, waiting for a reason. The ceasefire holds, but ceasefire and confidence are not the same thing, and the insurance market knows the difference. War risk premiums for tankers transiting the Gulf triple in a single week. Shipping companies begin pulling their vessels without waiting to be told. They have read the same resolution that passed in Tehran, done the same math, and reached the same conclusion. Brent crude settles at $120 a barrel, and not one ship has been stopped. Not one Iranian missile has left its launcher. The Hormuz card does not have to be fully played to reshape the world economy. Half played, held up to the light, it is already enough. The second half of 2025 passes in fragile, exhausting quiet. Diplomats talk, back channels stay open. The resolution sits in its drawer, signed and waiting, and the world begins, slowly, cautiously, to believe that the worst has been avoided. It has not. February 28th, 2026. Ayatollah Khamenei is dead. The supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the highest political and religious authority in the country, the man who has held the Hormuz card in his hand for decades, is killed in a strike. In the hours that follow, Iran's Defense Council convenes. Iran's chain of command moves fast, and the authorization that has been sitting in that drawer since June 2025 is taken out, reviewed, enacted. Within days of the strikes that kill Khamenei, ship tracking data shows a 70% drop in vessels transiting the strait. Some turn back. Some divert south around Africa, adding 2 to 3 weeks to their journey and tens of thousands of dollars in fuel costs per voyage. Some simply anchor offshore and wait for someone to tell them it is safe. No one can. By March 12th, 2026, the UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre has logged 16 attacks on commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf and 4 additional suspicious incidents since hostilities resumed. A tugboat sent to assist a stricken vessel is hit by 2 missiles. It sinks. 3 crew members are missing. A chemical tanker struck east of Khor Fakkan catches fire. 15 crew members are evacuated into lifeboats in open water. A bulk carrier reports an explosion 36 nautical miles off Abu Dhabi. No warning, no communication from any attacker, just an explosion, and then flooding, and then a distress call. The attacks are not random. They are calculated, precisely calibrated to maximum disruption with minimum escalation, enough to close the strait to commercial traffic. Not enough yet to trigger a full American military response. Iran is playing the instrument it has spent 40 years building, and it knows exactly which notes to hit. One Pakistani oil tanker finds a way through. It costs $2 million, a single transit fee paid directly to Iranian authorities in exchange for safe passage through the Northern Channel, Iran's channel, north of Larak Island, inside Iranian territorial waters, on Iran's terms, at Iran's price. The tanker makes it through. The message to the world is clear. The strait is not closed. It has been privatized. $2 million, one ship, one and a passage. That is not a shipping fee, that is a ransom. And it was paid because the alternative was no passage at all. This is what a closed Strait of Hormuz looks like in practice, not a physical wall across the water. An economic one set high enough that the world stops trying. On March 4th, 2026, Qatar Energy announces force majeure on all LNG shipments. Iranian strikes have damaged the Ras Laffan facility, the single largest LNG export terminal on the planet, responsible for supplying roughly 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas. 20% gone overnight. European natural gas prices double within 72 hours. And here is the part that makes energy ministers in Brussels and Berlin stare at the ceiling at 3 in the morning. Europe spent 2022 through 2024 diversifying away from Russian gas after the Ukraine war. It replaced Russian pipeline gas with Qatari LNG. It built new import terminals. It signed long-term contracts. It congratulated itself on solving its energy security problem. It had not solved the problem. It had moved it, traded a pipeline across Eastern Europe for a tanker route through the Strait of Hormuz, and called that energy security. The vulnerability was identical, only the map had changed. The American response is immediate and deliberately loud. Trump issues an ultimatum. Iran has 48 hours to fully reopen the strait, or the United States will destroy Iranian power generation infrastructure. He makes the distinction clear: not military targets, not missile sites or naval bases, power plants. The kind of strike that does not just degrade a military, it turns off a country. Iran's Defense Council convenes within hours. Their answer, when it comes, is just as clear. Any strike on Iranian power infrastructure will be met with the mining of the entire Persian Gulf. Not just the strait, but every lane, every terminal, every port from Kuwait City to Muscat, seeded with thousands of mines and no charts to find them. Every terminal, every tanker lane, every port from Kuwait City to Muscat. The 48-hour deadline expires. Trump extends it, then extends it again. The ultimatums keep coming. The strait stays closed. Then US military intelligence confirms what the shipping companies already knew in their bones. Iran has mined the strait. There are no charts for where the mines are, no coordinates, no record of what was placed where or when or how deep. Just a body of water that may or may not detonate beneath you, and no way of knowing until it does. Mine clearing operations begin. Slow ships in dangerous water, doing work that cannot be rushed, under the constant watch of Iranian missile batteries on the mountains above. It is painstaking. It is exposed. It is the most dangerous mine-clearing environment on Earth. The timeline for full clearance is not days, not weeks, months. This is the world right now. Not quite at war, not quite at peace. The strait is technically open. Ships can still move through it if they are willing to pay the price, take the risk, and hope for the best. But an open waterway that nobody trusts is not really open. It is just a more expensive version of closed, because trade does not grind to a halt only when the shooting starts. It slows the moment people stop being sure, and right now nobody is sure of anything. The crisis in the Strait of Hormuz is not happening to governments. It is not happening to navies. It is happening to the woman in Stuttgart filling her car, to the factory owner in Osaka calculating whether he can afford to run his production line next month, to the family in Cairo wondering why the price of cooking gas has doubled in 3 weeks. It is happening to everyone. And most of them have never heard of the Strait of Hormuz. Chapter 6. The world after Hormuz. Here is a thing that is easy to forget when you're watching news footage of warships and missile strikes and burning tankers in a sea most people could not find on a map. All of it runs on oil. The car you drove this morning, the bus that brought someone else, the plane overhead, the truck that stocked the supermarket shelf, the factory that made the thing on the shelf, the ship that brought the raw materials to the factory. All of it, every movement, every transaction, every ordinary moment of ordinary life in the modern world is downstream of a barrel of crude oil, and 20% of those barrels come through a gap in the Persian Gulf that is right now effectively closed. Brent crude spikes 13% in the hours immediately following the February 2026 strikes, before a single tanker is stopped, before a single Iranian missile leaves its launcher aimed at a commercial vessel. The market does not wait for confirmation. The market has read the last 3 chapters of this story. It knows what those mountains contain. It knows what is waiting on those islands. It prices in the fear before the fear becomes fact. Every $10 increase in the price of a barrel of crude oil adds approximately 25 cents to the price of a gallon of gasoline. The spike in February 2026 is not $10. It is 50, then 70 sustained week after week. That is over $1.50 added to every gallon at every pump in every country that imports oil, which is most of them permanently for as long as the disruption continues. Airline ticket prices follow within days. The fuel surcharge on every flight, domestic, international, short haul, long haul, climbs. Some airlines begin quietly cancelling routes that are no longer profitable to operate. Shipping companies add war risk surcharges to every container moving by sea. Those surcharges are not absorbed. They are passed directly to whoever ordered the contents of those containers, which means they are passed to the stores. And then to you. Oil is not just fuel. This is the part of the story that rarely makes the news. Oil is the feedstock for plastics, for synthetic textiles, for pharmaceuticals, for fertilizers, for industrial chemicals, for the rubber in tires and the coating on electrical cables and the casing around the device you are watching this on. A sustained oil supply shock does not just make driving more expensive, it makes almost everything more expensive. Because almost everything somewhere in its journey from raw material to finished product passes through oil. Airlines are cutting routes within the first month, not all at once, quietly, almost invisibly. A frequency reduction here, a seasonal route suspended there, the kind of cuts that the average traveller notices only when they go to book and find the flight they wanted, no longer exists. Freight costs, the cost of moving anything from anywhere to anywhere by sea or air, are up 40% by the end of March 2026. 40% on everything. Now leave the fuel story behind for a moment, because there is a second crisis running alongside it. Quieter, slower, more dangerous in the long run, and almost no one is talking about it. The Persian Gulf accounts for 30 to 35% of global urea exports, 20 to 30% of global ammonia exports. Up to 30% of all internationally traded fertilizer normally transits the Strait of Hormuz. Fertilizer is not a luxury, it is not optional. Modern agriculture, the system that feeds 8 billion people, is built on synthetic fertilizer. Remove it, and crop yields do not decline slightly. They collapse. Not this season. The crops in the ground right now will mostly be fine. The soil has what it needs for now. But the planting season is coming. And the fertilizer to support it is sitting in ships that are not moving, or in facilities in Qatar that are partially offline, or in supply chains that have been severed by a conflict most farmers could not point to on a map. When Hormuz closes, a farmer in Bangladesh cannot buy fertilizer. When he cannot buy fertilizer, his rice yield drops by 40%. When his rice yield drops, his family eats less. When his family eats less, his children's development is affected in ways that cannot be reversed. This is not a metaphor. This is the food supply chain of 3 billion people, and it runs through a 21-mile strait in the Persian Gulf. Now look east. Japan imports more than 90% of its oil, more than 90%, from almost zero domestic production. The vast majority of that oil comes from Gulf producers through the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea is nearly identical. These are not small peripheral economies. Japan is the third largest economy on Earth. South Korea is the 10th. Both are among America's most important strategic allies. Both are now looking at energy import disruptions of a scale they have not faced since the 1973 oil embargo. And then there is China. China and India together receive 44% of all crude flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. China holds approximately 90 days of strategic oil reserves. After 90 days, if the disruption continues, its manufacturing sector begins to slow. And when China's manufacturing sector slows, the entire global supply chain, which runs through Chinese factories for an extraordinary percentage of the world's consumer goods, slows with it. China is not a bystander in this crisis. China is exposed, profoundly, structurally, uncomfortably exposed. China gets 90% of its energy imports through the Strait of Hormuz. That is not a strategic position. That is a vulnerability, and Beijing knows it, has known it for years, has spent years trying to build alternative pipelines through Central Asia, alternative relationships with African oil producers, alternative energy sources at home. None of it is enough. Not yet. Not even close. For now, China needs the strait open almost as much as anyone. Meanwhile, in Europe, the gas price crisis that began with the Ras Laffan strikes in Qatar has become a political emergency. Heating bills are doubling. Industries that run on natural gas, chemical plants, glass manufacturers, ceramic producers, are curtailing production or shutting down entirely. Governments that spent 3 years reassuring their citizens that energy security had been solved are now explaining, badly, why it has not been. Because the uncomfortable truth is that Europe did everything right after 2022. It diversified, it built LNG import terminals, it signed long-term contracts with Qatar and the United States and Norway. But it never asked the question underneath the question. Where does Qatari LNG come from? Through the strait. There are bypasses. Saudi Arabia has the east-west pipeline, the Petroline. The UAE has a pipeline to Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman. Combined at maximum capacity, they can move approximately 5 to 6 million barrels per day around the strait. The strait normally carries 20 million. The bypasses cover less than a third of the gap. The other 14 million barrels per day has nowhere to go. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are already pumping at near maximum capacity. It is not enough. The bypass covers 1/3 of the gap. The other 2/3 has nowhere to go. The bypass is not a solution. It is a pressure valve on a system that is already rupturing. This is what a Hormuz closure looks like from the outside. Not explosions, not warships, not the dramatic imagery of a military conflict. It looks like a petrol station where the price has gone up again. A heating bill that arrived and sat unopened for a day before anyone had the courage to look at it. A factory that is running 3 days a week instead of 5. A flight that has been cancelled and cannot be rebooked because the replacement does not exist. It looks, from a distance, almost normal, until it doesn't. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide and on the other side of the world, and it is sitting at that kitchen table. That is the thing about invisible infrastructure. You never notice it until it breaks. And when it breaks, you realise it was holding up everything. Chapter 7. The point of no return. The first question everyone asks is the obvious one. Can't we just go around it? The answer is partly, and partly is not enough. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, the Petroline, has been running since 1981. It crosses the Arabian Peninsula and emerges at the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea. Design capacity, up to 7 million barrels per day. Current usage, approximately 2 million. That sounds promising, until you do the rest of the math. Even running at full capacity, the Petroline moves 7 million barrels per day. The UAE's Fujairah pipeline adds another 1.5 million. Combined maximum 8.5 million barrels per day on a good day, assuming no maintenance issues, no bottlenecks at the terminals, no export infrastructure constraints at the other end. The Strait of Hormuz normally carries 20 million. The bypass covers less than half the gap. The remaining 11 to 12 million barrels per day has nowhere to go. There is no pipeline for it. There is no alternative route for it. It cannot travel overland. It cannot be flown. It sits in the ground or in storage tanks or in the tanks of ships anchored offshore waiting for a waterway that is not open. 11 million barrels per day, stranded. Every day the strait stays closed. And for liquefied natural gas, there is no bypass at all. LNG cannot travel through pipelines the way crude oil can. It requires specialized tankers, specialized terminals, specialized infrastructure at both ends. Qatar, the world's second-largest LNG exporter, has 0 alternative routes. Every molecule of Qatari gas that leaves the country leaves through the strait. When the strait closes, Qatar's LNG stops. Full stop. No workaround, no partial solution. 20% of the world's LNG supply, gone. Could more pipelines be built? Yes. It would take between 5 and 10 years per pipeline, depending on terrain and political agreements. It would cost tens of billions of dollars each. It would require the cooperation of multiple governments across some of the most politically complex terrain on Earth. And by the time the first new pipeline was operational, the crisis that prompted its construction would either have been resolved or have already caused the damage it was going to cause. Infrastructure is not a crisis response. It is a generational commitment. The world has not made that commitment. It has had the option to make it for 50 years and has chosen, repeatedly, not to. Because as long as the strait stayed open, the pipelines were an expensive solution to a theoretical problem. The problem is no longer theoretical. The second question is the harder one. What if the world simply needed less of what moves through the strait? What if the energy transition that has been discussed and planned and promised and delayed for 3 decades had actually happened? The world currently gets 84% of its energy from fossil fuels: solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, the remaining 16%. To reach a point where a Hormuz closure does not trigger a global economic crisis, the world would need to have replaced enough of that fossil fuel dependency that 20 million barrels per day of oil could simply stop moving without catastrophic consequences. That is not a near-term reality. Even at the most optimistic pace, experts estimate it will take 20 to 30 years before fossil fuels drop below half of global energy supply. 20 to 30 years. The transition is happening. Electric vehicles are growing faster than almost anyone predicted 5 years ago. Offshore wind capacity is expanding. Battery storage is improving. Green hydrogen is moving, slowly from pilot projects to real infrastructure. But the gap between the speed of the transition and the speed of the crisis is enormous. The transition is measured in decades. The crisis is measured in days. Which brings the world, as it always does, to the table. Diplomacy. Not because it is inspiring, not because it is fast, but because it is, in the end, the only mechanism that has ever actually resolved a Hormuz crisis. Every major confrontation in this strait has ended the same way. Not with a military victory, not with one side destroying the other. Look at the tanker war, the 2019 drone strikes, the 2025 ceasefire. Every single one ended at a table, not on a battlefield, with back channels and intermediaries and carefully worded agreements that allowed both sides to claim enough of what they needed to stop doing what they were doing. Iran cannot permanently close the strait. This is the fundamental constraint that every Iranian military planner understands. Iran's own oil exports move through the same water. Iran's own economy depends in part on the same shipping lanes it is threatening. The IRGC commanders who built the Mosaic defense know that the weapon they have constructed is also pointed in a small but real way at themselves. The threat is sustainable. The act, sustained indefinitely, is not. Every day the strait stays effectively closed, Iran loses oil revenue it needs, loses trade it needs, loses the economic oxygen that keeps the Islamic Republic functioning. The weapon has a cost to the hand that holds it, which means there is always eventually a number, a price at which Iran's calculation changes. The world will not run out of oil because of the Strait of Hormuz. What it might run out of is the willingness to keep paying, in money, in lives, in political compromise, for the privilege of keeping 21 miles of water open. And the moment that willingness runs out is the moment the world finally builds something that doesn't depend on it. The Strait of Hormuz is not just an energy crisis. It is the most powerful argument for energy independence that has ever been made. The question is whether anyone is listening. Remember that Roman merchant from the 1st century, the one who wrote that all ships must pass through this narrow gate, that there is no other way. 2,000 years later, standing at the edge of the worst Hormuz crisis in modern history, the world has arrived at the same conclusion he did. The gate is still there. The ships still have no choice. And the men guarding the gate have simply changed their uniforms. The tanker is moving. Slowly, carefully, expensively, but moving. Because that is what the strait does. It moves, it has always moved. Through Persian kings and Portuguese cannon and British oil companies and American aircraft carriers and Iranian missiles and signed authorizations sitting in drawers. It moves. The question has never been whether it moves. The question has always been who decides the terms. The balance of terror. Every empire that has tried to own this water has lost it. The Portuguese held it for 115 years. Then the Persians and the English took it from them. The British controlled the Gulf's access for a century. Then the Americans replaced them. The Americans have been here for 50 years, and they have been pushed back slowly, steadily, to the edge of the waterway they cannot afford to abandon. No one owns the Strait of Hormuz. Everyone needs it. That is not a paradox. That is the definition of the trap. Strategists have a name for the arrangement that keeps the strait open. They call it the balance of terror. It is not peace, it is not stability in any meaningful sense of the word. It is the shared understanding held by every government, every military planner, every IRGC commander, every American admiral, that the full cost of permanently closing this waterway would be paid by everyone, including Iran, including the hand on the trigger. It is a truce enforced not by goodwill, by mutual destruction. The world built its modern economy inside that balance. It built refineries and shipping routes and supply chains and fertilizer plants and just-in-time manufacturing systems and airline networks, all on the assumption that the balance would hold, that the terror would stay mutual, that no one would actually pull the trigger. For decades, that assumption was correct. Then February 2026 tested it, and the world discovered that the balance, which it had taken for granted for 50 years, had always been more fragile than it looked. The tankers will move again. They always do. The strait has never been permanently closed, not in the age of oil, not through the tanker war, not through the Iranian Revolution, not through 2019, not even through the crisis of 2026. It closes enough to cause damage. Then it opens. Because the alternative, a world in which this water is truly, permanently shut, is a world that none of the parties involved can afford. Not Iran, not Saudi Arabia, not China, not the United States. The balance of terror has limits, and those limits are the only thing keeping the lights on. 21 miles. That is all it is. A crack in the map, a gap between two coastlines, a waterway so small that from a satellite it barely registers. And through that crack flows the blood of the modern world. Every barrel that heats a home in Germany, every molecule of gas that lights a factory in Japan, every drop of fuel in every plane over every ocean, every ton of fertilizer on every field, feeding every family on the other side of the world from here. All of it. Through 21 miles. Geography is not destiny, but in Hormuz, geography is a loaded gun. And the question the world has been unwilling to answer for 50 years, through every crisis, every ceasefire, every signed resolution sitting in every drawer, is a simple one. How long do you intend to keep standing in front of it? The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 20% of the world's oil supply through a channel 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. It has no adequate alternative. It has no backup. It has no plan B. It has only the restraint of the people who control it.